Good morning. I'm Merritt Maxim. I'm a principal analyst at Forrester. For those who don't know, Forrester is a global IT strategy advisory and consulting company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm on the security and risk team where I represent a team of about 25 analysts that work with clients, both vendors as well as end users, dealing with the full range of cybersecurity issues. So I'm pleased to start the next session here, which will be a panel. We've got a good cross-section of people from industry. I'll just kind of introduce them briefly, and then we'll actually get into a session that we will allow time for Q&A at the end, and I actually would encourage that. So if you do have specific questions, we'll try to hold 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. So I'll introduce the panelists, and they can go ahead and get seated. I've had the pleasure of talking on the phone, but not meeting in person. So we've got Bob Ackerman from Allegis Cyber, Mike Steed from Paladin Capital, and the person who I believe probably has an ACL injury based on something I'm well familiar with since both my kids have torn their ACL in the last year. I have Dov Yaron from Cisco and Yoav from JDP. So I've got a good cross section of panelists here. I'll kind of get it started and start briefly from like kind of talked about Forrester. You know, we and in our team are at capacity in terms of our client demand. To put in perspective, I do about 200 calls a quarter with vendors and suppliers, and most of my colleagues are at a similar level, and it's been that way since I joined Forrester 4 years ago. And there's no doubt that we could certainly hire more, but we're also hiring from many cases the same talent pool that many companies are in terms of cyber expertise, so we are somewhat limited there. But it does reflect the dynamic nature of the industry, and again, we work both with large companies of all shapes and sizes, but also with vendors from small startups to well-established vendors as well, and it continues to be interesting to see how much the market has expanded, and I think that would actually probably be my opening question. Maybe it's a bit provocative in this sense, but put up for the panel, is cybersecurity overinvested at this point in terms of the amount of companies and opportunities? Is the number of cybersecurity companies globally is in numbers in the thousands, and it seems to be growing at double-digit growth? Are we at a point now where there is going to be attrition, or kind of what's your overall view? So I'll serve it up to whoever wants to take it, and if others want to respond, I'd be curious, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So set the landscape, right? So all of our activity, our personal activity, our commercial activity, our governmental activity, is moving into cyberspace. And a good buddy of mine described cyberspace as the largest uncontrolled, unregulated domain in the history of mankind. There are no borders, there's no rules, there's no sheriff. And so when you think about the magnitude of that environment and the threats around that environment, it's pretty hard to say that we're underinvested. I think what you can say is that we are not always properly invested. One of the things about the venture community is that, and this includes the entrepreneurs, is once you identify where there's momentum, where there's opportunity, it attracts entrepreneurs and attracts capitals, like moths to a flame. And what tends to happen is things get overcapitalized in an indiscriminate way. And so when you look at cyber today, cyber is benefiting or experiencing that same phenomena. My observation would be there are too many undifferentiated companies doing the same things. Where there is overinvestment, we don't need another threat intelligence company. We probably need rationalization of threat intelligence. But there are other areas that are much more advanced that are underinvested in. If you think about things like data provenance, you think about data-centric approaches to security, which are cutting-edge, very advanced data science problems, they're underinvested. So it's not so much underinvested or overinvested, it's where the investments are being made. And the problem with cybersecurity is that the domain expertise that's required is much deeper than, let's say, the sharing economy. This is not Uber, this is not Lyft. And so the number of investors who want to participate in cyber is very broad. The number of them that actually can discern between a good idea, a bad idea, where the future is going to be is very, very limited. And that leads to this overcapitalization in the obvious and the undercapitalization in the not so obvious.
Just to add to that, I first of all wholeheartedly agree with Bob with those observations. I think we definitely have. We can also take a look at it from a different perspective. If you look at the number of cybersecurity companies and the number of exits that are happening, both M&A and IPOs, and the magnitude of such, then the numbers actually just don't add up, right? There is too much money injected into the industry and too much money getting back to investors over the last few years. So something needs to change in the market, and it relates directly to what Bob mentioned in regards to where are we investing. And I'll kind of express it through JVP's specific history. You know, we've been investing in cyber since the 90s, right? Before it was sexy to invest in cybersecurity. And for many years, cyber was a check-the-box kind of need on the part of the VP of IT, when it used to be called IT security, before it was called cybersecurity, right? So it was a check the box. Then it turned, once the attacks proliferated, to a business continuity issue. It started to reach the boardrooms. And today we're seeing that it's becoming actually a business differentiator for businesses. So businesses that have better cybersecurity will outperform their competitors in the market. They'll win more RFPs, they'll win more bids. People are starting to ask about that, and so forth. So the market is changing. The technologies and the vendor side has actually not changed that much. We are still investing in kind of horizontal technologies that cut across industries in a significant way. So a firewall, for example, or an endpoint security product, it's the same product for a hospital as it is for a cruise ship, as it is for a nuclear facility, and so forth. But customers, as I mentioned just now, are looking to solve their problems rather than buy horizontal technologies. A CISO of a hospital, right? A hospital is a very complicated cyber machine. You have IoT devices in the medical devices. You have the building itself is an OT machine. You have data security issues that you need to tackle. The CISO of the hospital, he doesn't care about any single component of that very complex machine. He wants to buy a solution that will address his vertical needs and its integrated needs in a very much ROI-driven manner. These are things that today cyber vendors and cyber companies are not providing. And this is where cyber investors will need to change their focus and start thinking about ROI and customer problems vertically oriented rather than yet again another cool technology that would last for 3 more years and will be replaced by the next, attack surface du jour that attackers are going after. So we're seeing a shift in the market. It's required by both the sheer metrics of money coming in, money coming out of the industry, and by the way that the purchasing patterns of organizations are changing nowadays.
So I think that's a good point. Let me pivot off of that. So at Paladin, what we do is we focus on critical infrastructure. We're looking at the digital platforms that are running critical infrastructure. And those digital platforms have changed dramatically since the 1990s, since the 2000s. And so there are certain areas that are overinvested, certain areas that are underinvested. And then there's some new evolution in cyber that is going to be driving an incredible level of growth and investment in the future. So the old cybersecurity was you put security over legacy systems that were running critical infrastructure. Those legacy systems were built to run critical infrastructure without any security. A tremendous amount of the early investing was in that area. Now that's overinvested. Very hot commodity style kinds of investing is going on in that area. 2 other areas that have grown up or are going to be really big in the future: enablement and monitoring and management. What's enablement? Enablement essentially says that when you build a digital platform to run critical infrastructure, you're going to build that platform with security inside of it. Tremendous amount of investing going on there. So think of automobiles. Okay, think of interconnected automobiles as only digital platforms. What kind of cybersecurity is inherent inside of those automobiles as you go forward. And then you have monitoring and management, which goes to, I think, the biggest issue that we can invest until the cows come home, but you still have humans running things, and humans make mistakes. And so how do you invest in those particular areas? But what's going on now? We did our first cyber deal in 2002. Cyber back then was technologies that were nice to have, but you didn't need them. And you had to fight a little corner of the IT budget in order to be able to get those technologies adopted. 2009, 2012, the world changes. These become technologies of need, and CEOs only ask two questions. Do I have best practices and best technologies, and will I survive? Now, we have entered a new phase, and this is really dramatic, and I think it's going to drive a huge amount of growth in cyber investing. It's what I call the mandatory phase. Governments, regulators, trade associations are going to mandatorily pass regulations and laws. They're going to say that the companies that you work for are going to have these things in order to be able to sell your products, services, and technologies out there. The key word is mandatory. If you don't see it in Europe, if you don't recognize GDPR, if you recognize what's happened in California, here in New York, I think probably the first mandatory, a lot of the first mandatory rules were put in here in the financial industries. You're going to see more and more and more of that. As the government gets its act together, which might be an oxymoron, but as the government tries to get its act together, we saw what did we see, Bob, this week? The NSA sets up the cybersecurity directorate. We're starting to see that come together now. And if that really comes together, that's going to drive further investments into the technologies, because the private companies that own critical infrastructure, about 85% of critical infrastructure is privately owned, is going to need to have these technologies. One final area to throw in here. The United States government, any government, is going to have cyber technologies that create active defense, better known as offense. If you do not have a deterrence, then you're going to fail. So all of these things have to work together, and so we're now seeing out of the innovation community and out of the entrepreneurial community, these offensive weapons being created, so that you can have that activity by the government. Government isn't doing it; they're doing some of it, but they're relying on the private sector to come up with it. So you're going to see a lot of investing in that area as well, I think.
Well, maybe in just a few words.
Sure.
Really simply, yes, there's a lot of overinvestment. There's a lot of dumb money that comes into cyber. I don't know about the percentage of people in the room, but in the market, there's just lots of outside money coming in. It's full stop, yes. The valuations, as kind of you mentioned before, are frothy and out of control, or kind of depending on where you're sitting, it's a good or a bad thing. So that always spells like, whoa, where are we in this heated or overheated market? The problem is the other side of the coin, and maybe just to summarize here from what all these folks are saying, is there's no magic bullet out there. And it's not like any one of these companies is going to suddenly solve the cybersecurity problem. So the problem is only going to get worse. Our lives are only going to get more complicated. Our systems are only going to get more complex, and the interactions and vendors and partners and things that we're communicating with in cloud computing and data is only just going to get more and more complicated and a wider attack surface, and you still only need one offensive, malicious, dubious user or attacker to control one element, one application system, and pivot from there. So it's, the market's out of control, but there's also no end in sight. So I don't see how it changes anytime soon.
Yeah, that's what we call, it's no longer defense in depth, it's expense in depth. Because of that more vendors. Yeah, so good first responses there. So actually, kind of following those themes, even if it is overinvested, there are still areas that we believe are emerging areas where we need more investment and more innovation. I'll start with you all, the specific areas. Obviously, with Cisco, you have a different perspective as a vendor. You've made some acquisitions, continue to make lots of acquisitions in cyber. Last year it was Duo, year before it was OpenDNS. Continue to build a large portfolio. So what does Cisco see from areas that you think are emerging where there's going to be more innovation and more investment required to kind of bring those products forward? And then I'll allow all the panelists to respond as well.
Sure. I mean, listen, we look at it from a Cisco standpoint where, we have, we are the largest enterprise security vendor in the market. So we don't provide anything sort of consumer grade, consumer level, at cost or as a product, as a price, as a sold product. But on the enterprise side, it's, our customers globally, from commercial select, SMB, all the way up to the telcos and government and everything in between, are asking for simplicity and asking for consolidation. And we have a number of different security products in network security, cloud security, and endpoint security. And how do we make those better work better together to provide a simpler environment for the operator to understand? And so what we do actively, proactively, on the technology side is we spend a lot of time reaching out into industry, integrating, pulling information, pushing information, exposing our APIs across the gamut from our product portfolio. And we work hand in hand with products that are competitive to some of our own portfolio. Just because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and dozen vendors in a large enterprise environment, and they all need to work better together. So there's lots of areas where we don't play, even though we're the largest in the space, right? We need to understand cloud and how working, workload environments, both in and out of your cloud environments, on-prem. There's identity that you mentioned we invested heavily in last year with Duo and sort of beyond corp and beyond trust types of perspectives. There's, compliance. There's still a whole lot of areas, which is funny how the industry is, hey, cyber, if you look at it, it's a good sized industry right now. But if you peel the layer back, there are so many micro sub markets that are all, cyber infosec related. So we're kind of moving in that direction to help simplify that environment as best as possible for our customers and partners.
I totally agree with Dov on sort of the push on the part of the enterprise customer for rationalization and simplicity. We're in the very, very early stage. As large as this market is, we're in the very early stages of its development. We're still trying to figure it out. And against this unknowable threat, the response on the part of the enterprise is, I'm going to try everything I possibly can to try and get ahead of this. And as a result of that, it's not unusual, in a JP Morgan to see 70, 80, 90, 100 vendors, inside of JP Morgan as they grapple with how do I stitch this together? What's effective? What's not effective? What's more effective? And we're at that point sort of on this first wave of innovation where there is a level of commoditization, I would say, where the enterprise customer is trying to rationalize, trying to integrate, trying to reduce the number of vendors, because all of those vendors translates to complexity. Complexity translates actually to less secure as opposed to more secure. So this first wave of innovation where people wake up, to Mike's point, and say, okay, this is real, this is serious, I need to jump on this, has led to this massive explosion of investment, a lot of undifferentiated innovation, and we're going to go through a period of consolidation. And that all needs to get rationalized. That's just the early stages of the game. What becomes actually more interesting is the next wave or the next phase of the market's development, which is where we try and move from being reactive to being proactive and to begin thinking about how do we design systems. How do we approach the management, in cyberspace of digital infrastructure in a way which is inherently more secure? And this is when I talk a lot about sort of data science-driven approaches to cybersecurity. if at the end of the day, the objective in many cyber attacks is data, what we spend a lot of time to date is, how do we secure our perimeter? How do we get good insight to the threat coming in? How do we find and kill the bad guys once they get inside of our networks? That's all important stuff. But if you step back and abstract, you say, what are they actually after at the end of the day? In many cases, they're after data. Manipulate the data, steal the data, control the data, whatever it may be. As I say, the mouse is always looking for the cheese. The bad guys are looking for the data. So while we try and protect all the approaches to the data, maybe we need to think about the data. And how do we take more proactive approaches to securing the data? And this is where technologies like homomorphic encryption come to play. Homomorphic encryption, for the not so technically inclined, is data that can be used while it's encrypted, so it's never actually exposed. Technology that's been developed by universities and intelligence agencies for years. Or you start looking at data provenance. How do I trust the data? How do I know that data is, in fact, what the data purports to be? So we're going to shift from secure the infrastructure to secure the data. And that's going to become a major area of innovation as the threat landscape continues to evolve. I think the other thing to realize, and I think we probably would all agree on this, you and I in particular would agree on this, is we tend to think of cyber from a defensive perspective. But if you really want to understand cyber and where cyber is going, you have to understand offense. The most advanced cyber capabilities in the world, and Mike, you touched on it, come out of the offensive side of the equation. This is where the playbooks are written. This is where the expertise is developed. This is nation-state sponsored activities where cyber techniques, technologies, methodologies are used to achieve national security imperatives. This is where the best engineers with the deepest pockets and basically the freedom to wander as broad and as far as they can, are developing playbooks in their expertise. So if you want to understand where cyber is going, understand offense. Now, Mike made a point about the concept of MAD, basically, mutually assured destruction, as a deterrent in cyber, which I fully agree with. How do you keep, and I'll say it, how do you keep the Russians honest? By them understanding that you have a capability that can do whatever they do and take it to the next level. And that tends to change the political calculus. But on the other side of the equation, pure innovation, we have a team in Maryland called Data Tribe, which pulls technologies out of the National Security Agency, in particular offensive teams out of the National Security Agency, and applies that practice to product, because those are where the playbooks are being developed. That set of expertise eventually ends up in the wild, picked up by all of the bad actors, and basically becomes part of the standard toolkit for advancing their activities. So if you want to understand where defense is going, understand where offense is going, because eventually it all ends up at the same place. And so, you guys in Israel are in a great position. We in Maryland are in a great position to kind of be able to tap into these deep centers of offensive capability where those playbooks are being developed and use those insights to develop the next generation of defensive capabilities.
I think it's a great point. It's actually pretty hard to leverage offensive technology and turn it into a defensive, real commercial piece of technology. I would mention one company that we invested in, we've exited since, which did a terrific job doing that, a company called Cyactive, that applied genetic algorithms on existing threats, existing offensive tools, to develop in their lab, to fast forward time essentially, develop the next gen of offensive tools and train defensive tools on information that was not in the wild, but rather developed only in the lab, and as such, gain a few years of defensive, peace of mind for the defenders. Remarkable piece of technology, exited, acquired by PayPal eventually, but very nice piece of technology. We're doing another company with the same founders nowadays in the cloud security space. But I would say that in terms of where are the next kind of pockets of innovation, there are three areas that are of interest to us. So I mentioned one of them already, it's the vertical solutions, which come and provide a much more holistic solution for a specific industry, be it advanced manufacturing, be it, for example, smart buildings, that are very much exposed nowadays, be it smart city, be it hospital, and so forth. So that's one area that I think we'll see companies growing rapidly in. The second a type of companies that are of interest to us are the ones that kind of hit the kind of holy triangle of cybersecurity. Better security, better user experience, better total cost of ownership. If you have a company that can address all those three different vectors in a single solution, that may be a winner. I'll give one example, a company called SDO, Secret Double Octopus. What they do is that they do one very simple thing. They use a specific type of a cryptographic approach to remove the passwords from the enterprise. Now just think what happens if you remove passwords from the enterprise. Much better user experience, definitely much better security, nothing to steal, nothing to spoof, things like that. And total cost of ownership goes down dramatically. So that's one example of a company that, and we're looking for more such like companies that kind of combine those three different vectors, better security, better user experience, better total cost of ownership. The third category, I think, that is of interest to us are companies that look at cyber holistically and try to understand the economic equations around it. Cybersecurity was designated by the World Economic Forum as the #1 risk to watch for a few consecutive years now. Now, organizations have dealt with risks for centuries now, okay? One of the main tools that they use to cope with risk is insurance, okay? Because we can't account for and cover all the different risks. So people buy insurance. They buy earthquake insurance, they buy all different kinds of insurance. It's very hard, I would say, or impossible today to buy effective, cost-efficient cyber insurance. If people were able to come up with a solution that properly evaluates the risk of an organization, come up with the right coverage, the right monitoring, the right forensic, the right type of compensation structure around cyber insurance, that's of a lot of interest to a lot of different entities. By the way, it's not just the insurance itself. If you think, for example, about, we all invest in the stock market, right? Either directly or through our 401ks, and we rely on the security ratings by the like of S&P and Moody's. However, these organizations which rate those securities, they have no capability to account for in their rating for the #1 risk, which is, again, cybersecurity, cyber attacks. So how come we rely on this incomplete set of ratings with our money without taking into account the fact that the biggest risk factor is actually not accounted for, okay? So the same type of technology that you can apply, for example, in cyber insurance, you can also apply that towards cyber rating and come up with a much more economically correct evaluation of risk associated with companies. So again, that kind of risk assessment and tying on top of that new business models like cyber insurance, like cyber rating, and so forth are definitely of interest to us as well.
Mike?
So let me break down just a couple of things that we're looking at. Cyber risk is one that we've done. We have a company out of Luxembourg called CyberHedge. Yesterday went live with a cyber index rating 5,000 companies, public companies, in their cyber readiness. Going to be used, we think, by the major rating agencies as they begin to look at, or mutual funds, as they begin to look at the kinds of companies that they want to put into their area. Again, very, very small startup company, but the concept, I think, is very important when you talk about risk, and we agree with that. We are continuing to go deep in the weakest link in cyber defense, which are humans. We did the PhishMe deal, now known as co-defense. We've just completed, we wanted to solve for bad code. Humans create bad code. We just did a deal, Secure Code Warrior. Secure Code Warrior is like a spell check. As your developer is sitting there actually doing code, It comes up against a set of policies and a set of threats and says this code is not secure, and then changes it. It's stunning. We want to do away with the Microsoft patch day or whatever they call it. Really a stunning technology for developers. 22 million developers out there. I can't believe there's that many, but there are. And we've just completed a third deal out of Estonia, which is an software education transaction for all security personnel in a company. So we go after the employees with PhishMe. We go after the coders. And now we're after from the CISO on down, all of those people to make sure that they're up to date, that they're correctly educated, and they're on time and on focus. I want to go back to what Bob was talking about, and that's offense. Terribly important to think about this, because I think that this is where a lot of things are going. And while the government needs offense, it's a different kind of offense. So you don't think of it as in the industrial age terms of nuclear, okay, which is where the concept comes from. In the nuclear, the bad guys have got their nuclear weapons, we've got our nuclear weapons. Once everybody knows where it is, everybody knows how it operates, everybody knows how to set up their defenses and their offenses. In the cyber, what the problem with offense is, and we're trying to solve for the government, is the question that once you fire back, you can never fire again. Because the bad guys now see that technology. They now see what is going on. You saw that in the 2018 elections when the US Cyber Command stands up and says, we saw the Russians coming into the United States, we fired back. The problem with firing at them is that once you fire, they now know the code, they know how to defend against it, you can't use it again. I'm making an overgeneralized statement, but the uniqueness of the investing will be is how can you solve that problem when you create those kinds of weapons. Secondly, in that area, big area, is to turn that offense into something that commercial companies can use. Not violating the law, I would never suggest that, but they can use that as a tool to review their readiness. And so we're working in some investments in those particular areas. But I think those are some of the areas, along with digital risk management, I think that become terribly important to companies on a going forward basis.
Let me pick up on a theme that you touched on there, Mike, is that challenge, that offense versus defense demarcation.
Yep.
I mean, we have a portfolio company called Dragos, right, which we all know. And Dragos is industrial control system security. So how do you keep the lights on? How do you make sure petrochemical facilities, can be defended? Things of that sort. So basically all that infrastructure that our economy operates. This is a great example of this offense to defense conversion. Rob Lee and his co-founders were actually ex-NSA, and they were the offensive team in industrial control systems at the NSA. They went from offense to defense when the Russians took down the Ukrainian power grid, because the governmental response was, okay, something significant just happened. What do we do about it? Who has the expertise? And so you reach into your bag of tools, you say, we have an offensive team that understands this environment, let's put them on defense. And so Rob and his team became the response team to the Russian attack on the Ukrainian grid. And that's what gave the insight into this expertise actually is dual purpose. It can be used offensively, but it also can be, because of that domain expertise and the understanding of the attributes, back to Yo's point about this use case, which is very, very unique. They understand the use case, they understand the technology, the infrastructure, what makes it different from JP Morgan, and what makes it very, very unique. So they had that expertise. That expertise was applied to the defensive side of the equation, and that gave the insight to, look, we need to kind of take this expertise and build companies that make this expertise available to industry so that we can secure electrical grids on a global basis or keep petrochemical facilities. And that insight, the Dragos team, there have been 5 organized attacks on critical infrastructure in the world today. The Dragos team identified 4 of the 5. And so that just comes with that level of expertise. I always describe it as, guys coming out of that environment have gears that others just don't have.
Sure.
Silicon Valley may be the center of innovation in the United States. It is not the center of cybersecurity innovation in the United States. That's much closer based to where the intelligence community operates, because they're typically operating 5 to 7 years ahead of where industry is. And that's that expertise. If you want to build effective defense, you need to be able to capture that expertise and apply it to the next generation of cyber defenses.
Great. I wanted to squeeze in another question here, but I am mindful of the time for Q&A. And I did just want to note with, you have mentioned Secret Double Octopus. When that's your company name, that's kind of proof that we've run out of names for companies. It's a good company name, but
It's a really cool name.
It's a really memorable name.
Yeah,
You must
it
admit that.
is memorable.
You don't forget that. Yeah, even though SDO kind of
Yeah.
takes some of the magic out of it, right? But the
I haven't
name is
actually
cool.
heard the SDO reference. Now I just heard Secret Double Octopus. So actually, we do have a few minutes left. We went a little bit over, but if there are questions in the audience, I'm happy to take them. If not, I do have other questions from the panelists we can kind of squeeze in. So I don't think we have a roving mic. If you just want to, speak loudly, state your name, where you're from, and we'll serve it up to the panel. The gentleman on the left, up there, yes.
Yeah, Martin McGee from Berkeley, Illinois. If, in order to effectively implement an offensive strategy, we need to see our laws change.
Yeah, this is the whole hackback conversation, and the conversation really is who's responsible for hacking back, who gets to go offensive, which is where, to Mike's point, you kind of get this nom de plume of active defense. Right now, basically, you talk to most enterprises, they don't want to get involved in offense. There's too much liability. That's a nation-state game, almost in many, many ways. And so what most organizations want to do is just be secure. And the more secure they can be, the better. Turn it over to law enforcement, turn it over to the government, and let them prosecute the bad guys. But there still are, where the legal stuff gets in is around collaboration. There are a lot of rules that are in place, particularly in the United States, that restricts collaboration between enterprises or between enterprise and government. And that's something where we need to modify those rules to add, a little more ability to collaborate and respond more quickly. Cyber is one of those areas where the more informed people are, the more secure they can be. But we need to facilitate that sharing of information.
So Bob's right, and on the commercial side, you need laws to change if you're going to do that. We don't advocate that. Otherwise, complete chaos would be the order of the day. On the government side, though, where they do have authority to do this, what they need is more authorities. In other words, either the Congress or the executive branch has got to authorize the military to have a broader base of authorities to operate. There's a thing called the Solarium Commission that's been set up by the government. It is now operating in part to create those authorities. And those authorities say, what can you do under what circumstances to be able to be in the offensive realm? And that's underway right now. I think they've got a report back by the end of the year. I think that's right. So for the government, they need broader authorities. They need to have authorities that are up to date for today's cyber world. And in the private authorities, Bob's right. If you don't have collaboration, then you can't fire back, and you shouldn't fire back if you're a commercial company.
Actually, I'm not sure I agree that the governments need more authority. I think they have enough authority as it is, and they do whatever they want anyway. So I don't think that they need more authority. I think that what is needed is more. You touched on the key issue, which is information sharing. I think that, as Ariel also mentioned in his presentation, cyber no boundaries, right? Cyber knows no boundaries, and we need to make sure that friendly nations or organizations that have common goals and common set of values are able to more freely share information to allow better investigation, better defense, better response, better penalty law, and so on and so forth. That's not available. It's happening in specific pockets, like, for example, a great example would be FS-ISAC, the Financial Services Interest Group. So that's happening there. Only now is it opening, by the way, to banks outside of the US, right, for the first year or two now. And other industries are just so far behind in doing so, and so are governments. So the US CERT hardly speak to the Israeli CERT. They do speak, but they're very hesitant about it. Same thing with the UK, Germany, France, and so forth. but there's a lot to learn from just exchanging information in both investigating, defending, doing forensics work, and so forth. This is where I would start, okay? And there are many other ways where you can implement attack side knowledge into both coming up with defensive tools such as Dragos, or on our side, SCADAfence and others, as well as just building that offensive mindset into the defensive tools in pen testing, in risk assessment, in fast forwarding the evolution of defensive tools like what Active did, and so on and so forth.
I would also add another consideration with offensive is the rise of false flags, which we've already seen in malware, where they will stick code from another nation state in the malware to try to falsely direct accusations, and that creates a whole other issue that we really haven't started to investigate yet. So that's, as we become more offensive, hackers will start to respond to that, which will make attribution even harder to actually do.
Attribution is the biggest headache
big
nowadays in
challenge,
cybersecurity.
And this goes back to, the whole provenance issue at every level. Now, how do you tell the ones and zeros where they're from, what their origin is, what their intent is?
Gentleman there, yeah?
Sean Drake with Stony Lonesome Group. First of all, great panel. Couldn't think of a better group to maybe direct this question towards. Bob, your comment about innovation and the epicenter still being with the agencies. I'm curious to know the panel's thoughts on the concept of, so for example, the Army just stood up the Army Futures Command, and the idea was to innovate better, faster, and interact with the private sector. How are we doing with that? How is that interaction towards innovation between the private sector and the government, and what can we do to make it better and more efficient?
You want to start with that, Dov, maybe?
Well,
I'm curious kind of what for private sector, I mean, from a cybersecurity excellence standpoint, kind of how you view that issue.
Sure. Well, I don't think the epicenter is the government. I usually think the government's the laggard. If you look at the lines of the DMV, it usually takes forever. Or usually innovation, in my opinion, comes from the commercial side and young or entrepreneurs, sometimes former military and government, sometimes not, looking at markets and doing things differently. So I think it's always been the chief challenge. I mean, even from the creation of DHS and how the public-private sector works in sort of bringing better, safer environments, certainly with critical infrastructure, and you mentioned Dragos and other companies where there's been a push from the cyber czars, if they're still around, in pushing public-private sector partnerships because it can't be fostered from the government. It's too slow moving, too bureaucratic, and antiquated.
Yeah, and just to kind of to amplify, I think when you think about government, you think about where cutting edge expertise is. Mm-hmm. They can't productize. They have absolutely no idea how to productize. They move at a glacial pace. So what you have to do is find a way to capture that expertise and get it into the commercial sector where it can be productized at the speed of the market. And that turns out to be a challenge. And historically, the government industry collaboration was not good. I think the Israelis actually have probably been the best in the world at it. The U.S. until really 4 or 5 years ago, the NSA didn't talk to anybody in industry at all. And what it is basically is necessity being the mother of invention. The threat landscape has continued to evolve in a way where people realize the old way of doing business no longer works going forward. We need to find a way to combine our strengths to be able to react in real time, become a little more proactive, a little more predictive, and that's changed things up. But I'd be kidding if I said it's all been figured out. It's a method that takes a long time to figure out. You're working at the speed of government in that particular case, and the adversaries have no such constraints. They wake up every day saying, okay, who do we want to take out today? And the reactive defensive approach is, okay, can we do this? How do we do this? When do we do this? Who do we need to get clearance from? So when you look at cyber, the advantage is always offense. It's always offense, which is why a tools-based approach to responding and securing is necessary. But you need to get to a much more proactive view of how do we secure the data, in end state today, so that when the offensive guys pick their time, pick their moment, pick their methodology, you're going to raise the bar for their ability to be effective, which is why I keep coming back to this data-centric approach to security.
I'm going to squeeze in one more question for let Mike and Yoav handle that. So we'll do, I'm going to be, okay, way in the back there. So get each section with a question.
You got to speak up.
Yeah, speak up.
Slightly
surprising number of organizations still being hesitant to use encryption and not using it. And some of the first breaches of the GDPR, the reason was data wasn't being encrypted. So my question really is twofold. Firstly, why do you think that is? And are you seeing that starting to change now?
Encryption's always been, I mean, 20 years I've been in the industry, it's day one and day whatever it is now, people don't encrypt as much as they should.
That's just being
Data.
stupid, right? That's just being stupid. It's one of the most effective techniques and technologies we have, and not to use it is just being stupid.
Yeah, but to those people's defense, I must, encryption is complex. You need to know what you do once you do encryption, right? You need to know what to encrypt, how not to
Correct.
break application, how to cost effectively do that, how to manage the keys, and so on and so forth. And actually, if we look at the modern architectures, microservices and things like that, and encryption actually gets much more complicated. The number of keys, the number of secrets, certificates, whatever need to be managed is exponentially growing up. So I think encryption is actually going to be more complex. Cryptography aware security personnel is actually that the ratio is going down. People are less familiar with cryptographic models and protocols and so forth. So I think that we will see, that's actually an investment opportunity that we are focusing on.
Like your STO guys, they'll go a long way towards cracking the code on
because we think that people should not be concerned about encryption. They should have tools that automate, apropos the discussion that we just had, automate the way that they do encryption in ever-increasing complexity of their IT infrastructure. So that's something that we believe is a great investment opportunity. We do see the phenomenon that you spoke about, and we believe that that's going to change over the next few years. By the way, another thing that just to think about is that the whole post-quantum thing. People are not, are far from being ready in terms of their post-quantum readiness, and I think that post-quantum to a significant degree is already here. So
it comes down to two things: ease of deployment, ease of use, and that's why they're not taking it on. We see tremendous encryption technologies, and our guys go out, they see it, they say it's the best thing we've ever seen, but there isn't a human that could use it. And that's really when it comes down to it. Find great investments in ease of deployment and ease of use, and I think you have a winner. Quantum, I'm with you on quantum, except I'm old enough now to have spent decades hearing people say within the next 5 years we're going to have quantum.
But you would agree, right, that the quantum resistant time is right now.
Absolutely correct.
Is right now.
Absolutely correct. This moment.
And I think on the encryption again. Look, the deployment from a complexity standpoint is a real issue, but encryption of data at rest and data in motion is pretty straightforward, right? And there is complexity when you get things like homomorphic encryption. Very, very complex, very powerful, but very complex. But the response can't be it's difficult, because I'll tell you, ask Maersk what it's like to pick up after an inadvertent cyber attack. That's complex, right? And so everything is hard, but getting ahead of it is easier than cleaning up after the fact.
Yeah. And there are, by the way, there are lots of initiatives on encryption moving forward, especially web traffic and the complexities also, by the way, have somewhat of a detrimental effect to your security products. If they're now all encrypted, you have sort of a blinder eye. That's right.
Yeah.
It's another debate for another panel, but something that's interesting.
You lose a lot of visibility when everything's encrypted.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I really want to thank the panelists. I think it was a very good discussion. We've got another panel to follow. I'll see you a little bit later today, but thanks again for your attention. Thanks to the panelists.
Good stuff.